Welcome to Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrinasalvati. My special guest today is economist Professor Richard Wolff. You've seen him here before. Welcome back, Professor Wolff.
Glad to be here, Sabrina, and glad to be talking with you.
So the housing market is back in the news again. There are reports that economists are seeing 2008 numbers once again. But the big story here is Gen Z and millennials, and this is something that we've been focusing on. I just want to share this here. This article that was published by Fortune magazine said that Gen Z and millennials can't afford to buy a house, and it shows. The number of first-time home buyers is half the historical norm. So this is a big one here that we've been focusing on. I went through the home buying process during the pandemic. I know how stressful it can be. And I've often told my audience that if it wasn't for those really low interest rates during that time and help from my parents, I don't know if I would have been able to do it. I definitely don't think I would be able to do it today. What is happening here? Should people be concerned? Are we seeing '08 numbers again?
Yes, I think the short answer to your very important question is yes. We are in a very serious economic decline. And we live in a country that is going through that, but is responding to it, if I can borrow a term from psychology, by what we call denial, by a massive pretense that something which is admittedly bad news and is scary, we make it go away by pretending it's not there. It is something we notice in children, and you're supposed to outgrow that kind of tendency. I remember when my little daughter first encountered a scary dog. She was about 3, and the dog was barking, and it was near us. So she put her little fingers in front of her eyes and felt much better because she couldn't see the dog. And in her little 3-year-old mind, if she couldn't see it, it wasn't there. You know, and if you're 3, that's okay, right? You're learning, you're growing up. But by the time you're 6 or 7, you've figured out that whether your hands are there or not, the dog is the dog, and he's still there. We're a nation that's becoming childish a little bit. Let me explain. Home prices for first-time home buyers are make a house unaffordable. The prices have gone crazy. On the one hand, the price of the home. On the second hand, the price of borrowing a mortgage, which is how most people buy homes if they're able to do it. The same is true of rents. They're at all-time highs. And in no way have the wages and salaries of the vast majority of Americans kept up with the prices of housing. So you've got a very classic situation that you are pricing a majority of the people out of the possibility of owning their own home or even of renting adequate space. That's why we have these strange other numbers which show that a dangerous level of people's income having to go to pay for housing if they're renting, for example, leaving insufficient money for all the rest of the things you need in life above and beyond where you live. And let's remember that number that first-time home buyers are less able to afford a home today. It was not this bad unless you go back to 1995, which is 30 years ago. I want to remind people, over those 30 years, the population of this country has gone up, meaning that there would be more first-time home buyers in a successful economy would be seeing more because more people are in that situation. Instead, we see less over these 30 years. That tells you something that can only be summarized in this way. One of the basic ways you judge an economy, any economy, is how well does it provide the basics, excuse me, the basics, food, clothing, and shelter. And the reality is, as your data in the clip you just showed us illustrates, is we live in an economy which is failing to provide adequate housing for millions and millions of its people. And yeah, they're not all wandering around the streets homeless, although we have a serious homeless problem in this country. But what they are doing is living in crowded circumstances that are not of their choosing. You don't have to be an advanced degree holder in psychology to know that if too many of us are living too close together, even if we're in the same family, or maybe because of it, we get on each other's nerves. In other words, it has serious consequences if you don't give people proper housing. I mean, it is a very serious sign. Now, my last point: there is an area where housing is being produced in record amounts around the country, but it's housing that we call high end housing. It's the housing that's expensive. It's the housing that is built, to be blunt, for rich people who can afford to pay 7% mortgage, who can afford to pay elevated rents or buy expensive homes. And we know the numbers. 20% of our people, 20, have enough money to be in that area where they can buy homes and they can trade up if they have the opportunity. But for 80% of our people, the overwhelming majority, this is an economic system now that is failing to provide food, clothing, and shelter, or at least the shelter part of it. And there is no sign, none, that this situation is going to get much better anytime soon.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Another thing that we see happening, in particular here in the Boston area, Massachusetts, is that more younger people are leaving the city and moving out to the suburbs where it's more affordable to rent, or they're moving to other states. There was an article that was published here last year encouraging young college students, college graduates, to leave Massachusetts and to move to Michigan if they want to buy a home. The only concern that I have with that is that if people start to flood Michigan, wouldn't the cost of living start to increase in Michigan as well? I feel like that's a temporary solution to tell people to move to these more affordable states or states that are cheaper. You also have to have jobs available in those states for everybody as well.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. That is not a solution. What that is an attempt to distract people from the problem by giving them this quickie idea. Oh, why don't you go to where housing is cheaper? My answer to that is, why don't we get the employers of this country to pay us the appropriate wages and salaries? Then we wouldn't have to yank our family out of Massachusetts and go 1,000 miles west to a Michigan, which has serious unemployment problems that you correctly point to, that has serious problems because when you have an economic decline, the way Michigan has, for example, because the automobile industry is no longer dominated by the United States. And all of those tariffs that you hear Mr. Trump talk about every day are not going to bring car business back to this country. General Motors now sells more cars in China than it does in the United States. And General Motors knows its future is China, not the United States. And they've made the adjustment. Americans may still like to demonize China or to say bad things about it, but I can assure you the business community is eager to please the Chinese so they have access to what is the fastest and biggest growing market in the world, which is not the United States. Going to Michigan, therefore, no one's going to do that. The jobs aren't going to come back. And yeah, you can get a cheaper home, no question about it. By the way, that's true for the whole Midwest. That's true from Minnesota and Wisconsin in the north all the way down, Canada, excuse me, Kansas, Nebraska, Missouri, all of those places, housing is cheaper. But here's the important insight you just gave us. It's cheaper for a reason. Nobody is buying housing there. Their economies are in such trouble that the people trying to sell a house have to bring it down because there's no buyers. To tell Massachusetts people to go to Michigan is telling them go because the housing is cheaper, and please don't pay attention to why that's the case, because if you do, you'll discover you're being asked to move to a part of the country where the economic situation is considerably worse than it is in Massachusetts. The per capita income of Massachusetts is much higher than that in the Midwest. In other words, it's a better functioning economy. And it's really a cheap shot on people to tell them that if the economy is failing, it's your job to take the enormous risk. I've been through several movings. I'm married, I have a wife, I have two children. I know what it does to a family to move. I know what it does to an individual. That's one of the biggest traumatic events of a lifetime. You will remember your moves better than you remember many other things in your own life. Don't tell people to move if the economic system isn't delivering what it should. Put your critical thinking on and try to make the economy better. Change it so it does deliver what it ought to deliver. That's the message that these statistics, I think, ought to convey to people who confront them.
And speaking of wages, there has been a big push over the years for a $15 minimum wage. But then I was introduced to this report called Out of Reach. Now, this report is published every year in July, and they actually show what you need to make in each state to afford a two-bedroom rental. One of the things I found very not so shocking, of course, is California is number one. They have the highest housing wage. According to the Outer Reach report, they say that you need to make $49.61 an hour to afford a two-bedroom rental. And if you're working minimum wage or paid minimum wage, you have to work 120 hours a week to afford a two-bedroom rental. And a lot of people look at this map and they say, well, it's mainly the blue states, but then you see Florida, and this is what I talked about with the influx of people moving from states like Massachusetts to Florida. Florida has become more expensive over time. They're now the ninth highest housing wage. But the point is that the $15 minimum wage at this point, I don't think, according to the Out of Reach report, isn't enough for people to live off of. Based on or adjusting for inflation, what would you say the minimum wage should be in 2025?
Well, you're talking to a person who takes all of this very, very, very seriously. I mean, a $15 minimum wage is being condemned to live a life of serious economic problems haunting you every day of your life. You cannot eat, drink, wear appropriate clothing, live in a decent home on $15 an hour. And by the way, I invite you to go to any state in the union and ask around, find the people that are living on $15 an hour, and then ask them if they would be so kind as to tell you what they had for breakfast, show you the outfits they wear, show you the apartment or the house where they live, and the conditions. And you would know right away, it wouldn't take you very long at all, that you don't want to live in those conditions. You don't want to have a family in those conditions. You don't want to live in the neighborhoods where people earning that kind of money live. And we kind of all know that. And yet we want to pretend that because there are employers who pay, and this is the truth, lower than that, I want to remind everyone that the federal government has, and has had for almost a century now, a federal minimum wage. Was passed in 1938 by the United States Congress and the President Roosevelt at that time. Today, that federal minimum wage, and believe me, I'm just a messenger, I didn't cause what I'm about to tell you, is $7.25 per hour. That's right, one of the lowest minimum wages in the world exists in one of the richest countries in the world, which tells you more than anything I can otherwise tell you. The richest country in the world has one of the lowest minimum wages. When was the last time the minimum wage was raised at the federal level? Answer: 2009. Okay, here we are, 15 years and counting. Over those 15 years, prices went up in America every year, sometimes only 1 or 2%, sometimes 9 or 10%. But in every one of those 15 years, as the cost of everything went up, what we paid the minimum wage stayed the same. We were savage to the poorest among us. I don't know what kind of religion or morals or ethics you all take seriously, but if they're anything like those I think we're supposed to have in our minds, there is no excuse for what we do in this country. That's why, by the way, half the states of the Union, half of them, have higher minimum wages passed by law in those states than the federal government does. For example, there are, I don't know the last number, time I counted, I would say there are 6, 7, 8 states who already have minimum wages above $15 an hour in order to begin to recognize the truth of what I'm saying, which is it is outrageous. It ought to be at least twice that. Maybe if we start at $30 an hour, we could address the 15 years of an unchanged federal minimum wage. By the way, there states in this country where they observe the $7.25? Yes, they are. And if you wanted to draw a map of the states where Mr. Trump is the most popular, and then the states where the minimum wage is the lowest, you'll discover that in general, it's the same states. It's an amazing situation that, again, has no justification. Of course, those people can't afford a two-bedroom apartment unless they're sharing it with three other families, which is what millions of people do. It is
That's right.
it is a it is a scandal. I mean, there's no polite word for me to use. I mean, I don't want to embarrass you or anybody watching or listening, but the truth of it is a scandal. It's an immoral way of treating our fellow citizens. By the way, it has nothing to do with immigrants. If anything, the immigrant condition is even worse, which is why punishing the immigrants by deporting them and having those ICE people do their horrible behavior on these poor people makes you shake your head. What is the country coming to?
It's really interesting. Another concern that people are raising with these jobs, this new jobs report that was released shows that the unemployment rate is increasing for Black Americans. In particular, 300,000 Black women just lost their jobs. I believe a big portion of that comes from the cuts from those federal jobs that Donald Trump made, which I tried to warn people about. There's that. There's also the rise of AI that's making people pause. Some of the retail stores near me that I've gone into, I notice I see less sales associates and more self checkouts. So there's a number of things that are happening where jobs are also being cut. The unemployment rate is continuing to increase, particularly with black employees. But then also there's the concern of AI. Some of these companies are automating some of the jobs that people used to do. And it makes people wonder what will be our role like in the future if AI continues to increase and the federal government continues to cut jobs. What is going to be our role? And I always pivot back to the states, right? Like, I feel like this is where the states should be able to jump in if they can. Some of those people that had those federal jobs, I would hope that they would be eligible for state jobs, although I know the state can be really tricky with employment. But then also, I think it brings back this question. If the states were to jump in, this is where I would advocate for a public bank because I feel like a lot of people just don't know that, like North Dakota, for example, they have the Bank of North Dakota, which is a public bank. From what I read, it said that because they had that public bank, that they didn't suffer as badly as other states during the '08 housing crisis. So I wish that more states would push for and advocate for having a public bank, something that can, because what we're seeing, Professor Wolf, is the federal government keeps kicking everything back to the states.
Yeah, I know a great deal. I've studied the Bank of North Dakota. You are quite right. A little history might help people understand it. It's over 100 years old. It was started at the beginning of the 20th century in that state. And it was the idea was we, the people of North Dakota, which is largely it's a relatively poor state. It's very agricultural. It doesn't have much industry and so on. It's very cold there in the winter. It's right up against Canada and so forth. Um, they said we don't want to be a minor issue for some big New York bank or some big California bank. We want to have a bank that is familiar with the conditions here in North Dakota. We want a bank that will help us, understand us, that is part of our community. And so they developed a bank which was owned and operated by the state, not a private bank. So for most of people watching this program, you don't have that where you live. The people of North Dakota, U.S. citizens, just like you and me, they have it. And here's how it works. When they pay taxes to the government, the state government in North Dakota, well, when those taxes are more than what the government needs to keep the roads open and run the schools and all the rest, go back into the general fund and they go into the bank. That is, if I misspoke, if the bank makes extra money, it gives it to the government because it's part of the government, which means they don't have to raise taxes on their people if the bank is making money, because when the bank makes money, that's profit that flows into the government of North Dakota. And of course, when hard times hit, these are North Dakotans. They're talking to their neighbors who have a mortgage for their home, or they're talking to their local small businesses who have loans at the Bank of North Dakota. So successful has it been that over the last 100+ years of its existence, despite the effort of private big banks in America to get rid of this one example. Let me remind everyone, we have 50 states in the United States. Only one has a public bank. They've kept the others from doing it. But despite Republicans and Democrats who occasionally tried to do what the big banks wanted, up rose the people of North Dakota, businessmen and women, working class people, farmers, and they all said, we want the public bank. And that's why it's there now. Very successful. And it is something missing in other states, which is why there are efforts. I have worked with several of them in many parts of the United States, both at the state level and at the city level, to develop public banks that would be more concerned with maintaining the economic well being of everyone than in serving just the biggest and richest employers, which is what private banks mostly do. So it is very important to understand that we live in an economic system that puts the priority on private wealth and private enterprise and believes that this is the royal magical road to prosperity. Well, let me tell you something. It may be for that 20% that we spoke about before, but for the majority of people, it is not working out very well. And that's why we have to say what we have to say about housing, about wages, and we could go on. I have been talking in recent weeks about the inflation that is entering into our food chain, the grocery prices that are already a problem for millions of American families are about to get worse. And that's a result of the tariffs. You know, Mr. Trump talks about the tariffs doing a wonderful thing. Well, let me tell you a little quick story. When I get up in the morning, I do what I think many Americans do. I need a cup of coffee to get going, and I often put either milk or sugar in my coffee. Okay, we don't produce coffee in the United States, not a significant amount, a little bit in Louisiana, a little bit in Hawaii, but basically the coffee we all drink is imported and is now being subject to a tariff tax, which is going to raise the price of our coffee. Well, I got also more news for you. We don't produce the sugar in sugar, the sugarcane sugar. We import that. So that'll be affected by the tariff, which means the coffee and the sugar that we all, or many of us, start our day with is going to be whacked with increases in prices. You're going to see your local coffee shop, or if you buy your coffee in the coffee bean form, all of these prices are going up. And it's another failure of this economic system. Now, a failure added to the housing failure and the wage failure, you're going to get a grocery failure. We are moving as a nation in a direction that is going to make the inadequacy of our economic system issue number one on everyone's mind in a matter now of weeks and months.
Yeah, it's a big concern. And you talked about the tariffs. President Lula from Brazil is making a push for de-dollarization. Brazil is a part of BRICS, and this conversation has been brought up before by President Lula, but he seems adamant on trying to make this happen. And I think what some people may not understand is part of the reason is because the US government can sanction these companies, these countries, right? So if they were to break away from the US dollar, that would prevent that from happening. The US wouldn't be able to sanction them for whatever reason. But if countries start moving away from the dollar, that would greatly impact all of us here. And it's just, and these are the kind of things I think like globally, people just need to pay attention to what's happening because a lot of times I hear people say that they just focus on what's happening right here. They don't care about what's happening abroad, but you should, especially when it comes to the economy. If if the BRICS countries, or let's just say even Brazil, if they start to move away from the dollar and they develop their own currency or go with a different one, that is greatly going to impact us, I believe, partially because of trade, but then almost to the point where the dollar won't be worth anything.
That's right. Look, Mr. Lula has a bit more courage than a lot of political leaders. And so he says things that are being thought by a lot of them, but they're diplomatic in the sense of softening what they say relative to what they believe. Mr. Lula is like that too, but Mr. Trump, you should all know, has been going after Mr. Lula with much more intensity than he has gone after many other global leaders. So you have there the clash of two people who are mad at each other. over the last 2 months, Mr. Trump has particularly hit Brazil with high tariffs and threats of even higher ones, and has used as one of his concerns as to why he's doing that. He wants Mr. Lula to stop the prosecution of the previous leader of Brazil, a man named Bolsonaro, who is being put to trial because he's accused of major crimes. Uh, this is what we used to call interfering in the internal affairs of another country. It is not appropriate for the leader of the United States to mix into the internal political differences. We had a major struggle in this country over recent years when there was an accusation made that another country, Russia, might have interfered in the elections for president here in the United States. We were told by the people who were concerned how outrageous it would be for another country to interfere. And here we are doing it. Mr. Lula is not pleased since he's the current president and he was jailed by Mr. Bolsonaro when Mr. Bolsonaro was the president. But here's the reason you need to pay attention, just to illustrate the wisdom, Sabrina, of what you said. Let's go back to coffee. Brazil is, I believe, the largest provider of coffee to the United States. If you put a heavy tariff on coffee, it's going to mean that, let's say, it costs $10 a pound to buy Brazilian coffee. If Mr. Trump hits them with a 25% or a 50% tariff, you're going to have to pay $1 to get Brazil to send the coffee and then pay Trump 25 or 50 cents more, right, per dollar of the cost of your coffee because of the tariff, which means the price of your latte next week is going to go up a lot. So, yeah, you have to pay attention because if you pick up a latte on the way to work and you do it many days a week, you're going to be spending big bucks on coffee that you didn't have to do before. And if the BRICS countries decide, and they've been discussing this for years, to move away from reliance on the dollar precisely because the American president is so aggressive to their hurt, to their detriment. Yes, it will make an enormous difference. And let me summarize real quickly why. Brazil is a leading member of the BRICS nation. BRICS meaning BRICS, the first initial of the names Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But those 5 countries have now been joined by a dozen more, actually more than that. But if you add up right now the population of the BRICS countries in the world we live in, the planet we inhabit, it's already well over half the people of this planet live in those countries. What's the percentage of the world's population that lives in the United States? 4.5%. What are we doing as a nation when we try to control, to dominate, to interfere in, to hit with economic weapons a population many, many times bigger than us? You know, in the long run, that isn't just a failed idea, that's downright stupid. And we are in a place in our country where we're having economic difficulties, and we have a leader who's trying to make the rest of the world pay for our economic difficulties, and we wonder that they're not enthusiastic about it. They want to free themselves from being vulnerable to a powerful country like ours, saying the rest of the world has to pay taxes to us, not just to their own country, but to us in some way. We're going to sanction them and punish them and this and that. You're going to see a reaction over the years ahead for which the American people are not ready because they don't understand, because they don't want to face what is in fact going on. Mr. Lula speaks the way he does because he knows that the majority of the people on this planet are cheering him on. They're not cheering Mr. Trump. Not at all. But they are cheering the resistance to Mr. Trump from people like uh, the President Lula, which is his nickname. Da Silva is his name, from Brazil. And Americans pay no attention to that, but they do so at their own peril.
Yeah, the West is very small when you compare it to the rest of the world. And even economically, when we talk about where money is going, all of the money that the US government is giving to Israel, it's astonishing. And not just the 3.8 billion, but we found out, after October 7th, we all started doing our own digging. I found out that Boston was sending 10 million to Israel, but we have people on the street here. We have homeless people here. We have people that can't afford housing, but they're sending 10 million to Israel. And the rest of the world has really turned on Israel. Germany had just made the announcement that they're going to suspend arms to Israel, even though I would say they were the second most supplier of those weapons after the United States. But economically, even some of the Trump supporters are now saying they don't want their money going to Israel. So I think that Donald Trump has a big problem because this is the first time I've seen where even some of the MAGA base is not happy with where the money is going. They're not happy with the starvation in Gaza. Like the numbers are showing it, the polls are showing. And I think that Trump did not expect this.
Yeah, it is the horror of what is going on in Israel, what they've done to the people of Gaza. We're going to be talking about that. Well, let me give you an example. This week was the 80th anniversary of the dropping of the atomic bomb on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 80 years ago, that happened. It is the only time in the history of the human race that nuclear weapons were used by one country against the citizens of another country. And we, the Americans, bear the guilt of having done that, of having taken that extraordinary step that no other country ever took. And so there were celebrations around the world, not so much in the United States, which you can kind of understand because it's hard for Americans to look at the pictures that you can see of what those atomic bombs did. But we will never forget that. That's why we see celebrations around the world. Well, the world is not going to forget what Israel did in Gaza. It is a stain upon the history and the reputation of Israel. And because of the peculiar relationship between Israel as a country and Jewish people all over the world, it's going to be a burden for those Jewish people to carry. Not that they need it, but they will have no choice because of the actions of Mr. Netanyahu and the people of his government. And yes, Americans are simply among those people around the world that are horrified. Long ago, the government in Ireland recognized the Palestinians as a separate people and broke their relationships with Israel. Spain has done it. We recently saw that the French are about to do it. Even the British are talking about it. The only country of any significance that supports Israel at this point, given what it has done and is doing, is the United States. And of course, thoughtful people across the political spectrum, even among MAGA folks, yes, there is the question, and it's been there a while. Is this a smart move to connect the United States with something that every Arab person and every Muslim person around the world sees as a horrific assault on their co-religionists, the people that they share a religious belief with? I mean, try to turn this around and imagine if it was happening in an Islamic country to Christians. What kind of talk there would be? What kind of, what, just let yourself for a minute think like that. You would understand that this looks to the whole world what the United States is doing and what Israel is doing as the last desperate gasps of white colonialism trying to control what we now call the global South. And we live at the end of a century of anti-colonialism. Those little countries in Europe don't control anything anymore. They once thought they controlled the whole world. The British like to say the sun never sets on the British Empire because we have so much land in so many places that the sun is always up somewhere. And they had such an empire, and they ripped that empire off, and eventually that empire told the British, go home. And that's why they don't control India and they don't control Africa the way they once did. Israel and the United States are efforts to keep settler colonialism alive. They don't have domestic opposition here because we genocidally killed off the indigenous population of this country when the Europeans came. Israel is trying to do that also to the Palestinians. It's not going to work. However long it takes, the resistance of the people of Gaza, what they have endured and stayed there, is absolute. We will be wondering and trying to understand not only why the Israelis could and did do what they did, but where did the strength come from in the Palestinian people, given what they have suffered there? It's absolutely extraordinary, and it will not continue much longer.
And that brings me to Zoran Mandami, who is polling very well right now. If the election was today for NYC mayor, he would win. It's not even close between him and Andrew Cuomo, and Eric Adams has fallen far down on the polling list. Zoran Mandami, during the debate, said when he was asked where he could go or where's the first place he would go as mayor, when everyone else said Israel, he said he wouldn't go anywhere because he said he wants to focus on helping people in New York City. It has just been announced recently that apparently Donald Trump has gotten involved in this race. He has contacted Andrew Cuomo, and it's very clear to me that they're trying to do something. They're trying to make it so that he does not become mayor of New York City. Now, I have some of my own concerns with Zoran. I think some of the things that he wants to do, like the free buses, which can be done despite what people say. I think he would have to get the approval of Governor Hochul. I don't think she's going to approve some of those things. And the other thing is that I do worry is we do have this fear that he may become like another AOC, right? Like he's saying all the good things now, but if he were to win, he may go alongside Democrat establishment. So there is that concern. That being said, in this particular race, there isn't a third party candidate that is running, and the independents aren't actually independent, if we want to be real here. I really believe Zoran Mandami is going to win this unless Donald Trump and Andrew Cuomo pull something up their sleeves. But what are you hearing from people in New York? Because another poll also shows the majority of Jewish voters under the age of 45 are supporting Zoran, not Andrew Cuomo. I think this is a big failure for Andrew Cuomo. I don't understand why he's still in this race after he lost the Democrat primary. But I think that Zoran can actually win this. And I think, again, this shows the shift, the geopolitics shift here of people moving away from what Israel is doing and focusing on more so aligning with the resistance.
Yeah, I live and work here in Manhattan. So I have followed Zoran Mandami's efforts, his campaign from the beginning. And here's how it looks to me as I talk to the people I work with and live among here in Manhattan, where I live. The answer to the question that I come up with most often is this. And I'm quoting what people say to me, we are sick and tired of the old established political options that are given to us every election. The Republican and the Democrat. We don't see a big difference between them. They all make promises, most of which they don't abide by once they get elected. They keep the status quo. They keep the system running the way it has been running, but that's the problem. We believe it has to change. For example, rents here in Manhattan are ridiculous. Even in large parts of Brooklyn, they are way beyond what anybody can afford. I mean, it's out of control. And the prices of food, New York was always an expensive city, but now it is kind of crazy. People use that kind of language. And so it needs somebody to come in and really deal with that. And there's no reason to expect Cuomo to do that. Andrew Cuomo. He didn't do it when he was governor. He didn't. Nothing. There's nothing. He's another one of the Democrats. We can expect him to do what he does. That he also behaves inappropriately with women, that isn't very surprising either, and doesn't make him attractive at all. I mean, look at this story. It's kind of amazing that he would run again, given what he didn't do and given what he did do. What a combination. The only hope Mr. Cuomo ever had was to somehow say, this Mandami character is really scary. You wouldn't want to vote for that. Vote for me because I may not do you any good, but I'm not scary. I'm the male equivalent of Governor Hochul, who, after all, was chosen by Cuomo to be his running mate, which is why she became the governor when he had to step down because he said and touched women and all the rest that we know about. So Mr. Cuomo's problem is he's the same old, same old. And Zoran is something very different. And he's different even before you get to the particulars of what he's proposing. He's different because he's an attractive young man. He is a Muslim. He is, not all that white, blah, blah. He's telling you right away before he opens his mouth, I'm different from what you're normally used to having a major position. It's already surprising that he could be in the state legislature. That tells you at least that he got support in the area of Queens where he comes from. But running for mayor, he had to appeal to lots of people. And he did. And he didn't have to, become pro-Israel to do it. The Jewish community in this country is split, just like it is in many other parts of the world. And the majority are not supportive of what Mr. Netanyahu is doing in Gaza. That may not be known to many people, but it is the truth. I know that directly. So he was able to say, I'm not going to get torn away. Just like I'm not going to get fooled by being asked what country I'm going to visit. My job is to be the mayor of New York. Now, having said that, I also think he will win. I don't think the issue is Mr. Cuomo. I think the issue is this. how many billionaires, how many big businesses are going to contribute how much money to Mr. Cuomo or whoever else they might pick up and support. You know, our elections are heavily shaped by the money. That's why so much money is raised and spent on them. And so Mr. Mamdani's problem will there be a coming together of enough money to give to whoever's running against him to put out advertising that makes him look bad with true or false accusations? We won't know until the time is over, right? We're talking between now and early November, and that's not very long. And will they have enough money to smear him and to elevate somebody else like Cuomo? To work with Cuomo means they have their work cut out for him because nobody really wants him very much beyond, I don't know, Staten Island. There's nothing there for him. His career is over by his own doing. If I may, about the public transportation. In my lifetime, I have visited quite a few cities in Europe where this was already done and done very successfully for many years. I remember in Hungary, in Budapest, one of the great cities of Eastern Europe, they for many years had what they called the honor system. There was a price to pay for getting on the subway or the bus, but there was no one taking the money. It was up to you when you went by the little machine to drop your coin or whatever you had in there. And you were asked to drop a certain amount, but if you didn't have it, you didn't. If you had half of it, you put that in the machine. And that's how they did it. And nobody was there to catch you. If you didn't put money in, the only thing that might happen is that another rider on the bus would come up to you and say, "Look, citizen, it is wonderful that we don't have to pay. Sometimes we can't afford it. But if we all don't pay, we won't have it. So fine this time, but be a good citizen. Make up for it when you've got the cash." And you know, it was a very sophisticated way. I don't know if the city planned it, but that's how they were able to afford to run the city. And others have proposed it and have tried it. In many cities, for example, in Europe, they will make the public transportation system free on weekends. So they go after people, Monday to Friday, but Saturday and Sunday, and it could be a way for Mr. Mamdani to show quickly, I'm going to do things that are good for average people. For rich people, it doesn't matter whether they pay or they don't pay on the subway. That's what being rich means. But for those who aren't rich, it matters. And if you can take your kids to Coney Island on the weekend and you don't have to pay a subway fare to go out there, it adds up. It adds up. Or, and then there are other ways for him to make up that kind of revenue. It can be done, and it's important symbolically not to fall in to the notion, well, he can't do that. He has to get the legislature to agree. Well, that's not the problem many Americans think it is. Don't be caught in the past. In the past, anybody who said something like that, free transportation, would be shot down. We will never do that in the legislature, or the governor will never do it. But we're in a different time. Nobody expected Mr. Mamdani to walk away with this election. That tells every politician something. Be very careful. You don't want to get on the wrong side of whatever it is that's putting Mr. Mamdani into office. So if he gets to be the mayor and he proposes that buses and subways be cheap, half the price, or whatever, free, guess what? I would say to you, if I were a fly on the wall, if you were a fly on the wall in the office of Governor Hochul, she's going to have advisors, and they're going to say to her, you better not veto what he's doing. Because if you do that, all the voters of New York who voted for him are going to be looking to vote against you because he was prepared to do something. He was in a position to do it. You said no. That may make you popular among the rich, but it won't make you popular among the people who put Mr. Mamdani in office. And then they will remind the Governor Hochul that in this state of New York, it's the city of New York that delivers state jobs to Democrats because the rest of the state doesn't do that. And she's going to have to think long and hard. She may be opposed to it, but that's not the issue. You want to hold on to your job, Governor Hochul? Be very careful as Mr. Mamdani, as mayor, comes up with proposals. Do you really want to be hung out there as the one standing in the way of free public transportation, of a rent control that really works? You don't want that. Your career will come to a crashing end, and soon if you do. She cannot avoid that kind of it. She may not go with that advice, but if she ever were to ask me, based on what I know as a resident and a voter for Mamdani and for her, I would tell her, don't do that. And it wouldn't just be because I like what Mamdani does. I do. But I wouldn't be for that reason. I would be, your career is over if you become known as the political obstacle that prevented Mamdani from doing what the people voted for him to do. That's a very powerful position for Mr. Mamdani. And if I were writing his, I'm not, but if I were writing his public relations, I'd be coming down hard on just that idea.
Well said. Thank you so much, Professor Wolff.
Well, it's my pleasure, and let me compliment you on the air. Having programs like yours that bring these issues out, that put this stuff out there for the public to think about and reflect on, is an enormously important public service that you perform. And I just want to thank you on behalf of all the people that benefit from your doing that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.